Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to An Elegant Weapon, episode 454. My name is J.M. Clark, and it is so wonderful to have all you beautiful weaponeers back here on the show with me. It has been a very long time, 10 months to be exact. It's good to be back. Sorry I was away, but I needed a break. After 13 years of podcasting and interviewing hundreds of creative types, yeah, I needed a break. I'd hit a bit of a creative wall myself after 13 years. Sometimes that happens. And you need to try something else. So about a year ago, I started a YouTube channel sharing my lightsaber collection, which old listeners of the show will know to be quite extensive. And new listeners of the show, and I might say new viewers, as we shall now be posting on YouTube as well. Yeah, as you can see behind me, for those who are viewing, I have a lot of lightsabers. I have a very extensive toy lightsaber collection. So I decided to start sharing the love and lore behind those lightsabers on YouTube. And you guys seem to like it. Things took off a little bit. So after a year of doing that, I've gotten to meet quite a few more creative types, especially in the Star Wars community, since I've been focusing on that, not so much the comics, over the past little while. I've had a huge year of Star Wars. So you know what? It finally felt right. It finally felt like it was the time to bring back the show on this new platform that I have built this incredible new community on. Thank you, everyone, for watching. For all of you who have subscribed and follow the show, I cannot thank you enough. I am so glad that you enjoy the videos, that you enjoy the lightsabers. I am having an absolute blast bringing them to you. So, for those old listeners of the podcast who may have returned to us after 10 months, yeah, check out An Elegant Weapon on YouTube, and you'll see what I've been up to for those 10 months. For those of you who have been watching me on YouTube for the past 10 months, you can find the show on iTunes, Spotify, all the great places where all fine podcasts can be found. You can go back and hear what I was doing the 13 years before I started sharing these lightsabers with you. So either way, I digress. It's good to be back on with the show. And I've got a hell of a guest to return to you with. He is the Academy Award winning set director of Star Wars, the creator of the very first lightsaber, and so much more. He's had an incredibly extensive film career, which you're going to hear all about during our conversation. I've gotten to know Roger a little through conventions and appearances, hosting panels for him. He's an incredible man with just a huge treasure box of stories, the most intimate stories about Star Wars from day one. He has a book called The Cinema Alchemist, of which there is a brand new printing available, which includes a brand new foreword by George Lucas himself. It's a beautiful foreword. So Roger's been trying to get out there and just spread the word about his book and his documentary that he's trying to get out there, A Galaxy Built on Hope. And we talk all about that. It's an extensive podcast. This will be part one. It's about an hour and a half. And then there'll be a part two that's about an hour and a half because I could talk to this guy for days, and hopefully you can listen to him for days. But either way, we'll see how that goes. But welcome back. It's cool to be here. I'm very, very excited for the return of An Elegant Weapon version 2.0, shall we say? Very cool. So yeah, we're gonna kick things off with a bang. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy my conversation with the Academy Award-winning set decorator of Star Wars. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Roger J. Christian. Again, thank you so much, Roger, for taking the
It's good.
time to chat with us today. This is so exciting. I've had the extreme privilege over the last little while to get to spend a lot of time with you at conventions and Star Wars community interest type things, dinners and such. And I have been spoiled with a plethora of stories over the last like year or two. And you know, we need to share that. We need to share that with the world, which is something
Right.
you've kind of taken on almost as a personal mission of yours, being such a key part of the original kind of core of those who created the Star Wars universe. it seems to have become a very personal thing for you to tell these stories and keep this history alive. Yeah.
It is. I mean, partly, because I had to write the book, and it's this realization that I am the only one who can tell the stories. There isn't anyone else. It's like a privileged position and a lonely position and a position that has to be done because this movie is unique in this world of history, cinema, everything you can think of. And as its origins have to be detailed and put into place. And I'm the only one who can do that. I'm the only one who knows the stories because I did it. And without John Barry, the designer who died very young, but even him didn't know what I was doing. He just knows I would bring him all this stuff and junk and kind of smile, thinking I'm mad, like everybody did. But
Yeah. As long
it's
as
very
George was happy with it, right?
Yeah, that's what my connection to him was, and then having this book, and then they decided to retire it, and then I told them how crazy they were. You can't retire this book. It's not even gone out. So I thought, you know what? There's only me. I'm going to have a one-man band here. I've got to get out on the road. I've got to tell people I have to get this exposed. I want to start the YouTube channel and put that into place and tell all these stories. And it's not out of ego, it's because, like you, I meet millions of fans who are eager to know. And I think it's part of the underbelly, if you like, of Star Wars, the hero's journey. And it relates to everybody. And the hero's journey is all of us. It's mine, it's yours, it's every single fan is going through the same hero's journey. So I feel it's my duty now to do it.
Well, I can attest to the fact that it is actually it's quite humble the way you go about it because you have an extensive career. You've worked on a lot of amazing things, and to your own credit, have a long accomplished history of cinema and filmmaking, and you let this movie shine. I see you with fans. I see you chatting with them and you're giving them what they want, the details of the story without, making yourself the center of it or concentrating on your part in it even, except for that's your point of view. And yeah, I just want to say that because, this is definitely personal for you. You take this very seriously.
I do. And in some weird, strange way, I'm very like George. You never see him trumpeting out and nothing. There's no social media. There's nothing. He talks about Star Wars in the third person and is very critical of, you know, anything negative, but he's kept himself elusive from this world, and he's a different position to me because he's the master creator. So, I mean, he would be mobbed. I mean, just shredded alive if he went in public. So I feel, okay, I got to do it because I do kind of represent him. And as you know, the book, when I got Titan to understand that this is a most important time and it's being relaunched now, it's out now. And I asked George, and he actually wrote a beautiful little forward for
Oh, it's
me.
so good.
And it's very personal. And he's put his name on the cover. And it shows how much I kind of meant to him. And I thought, I've got to do this justice now because he's put his faith in me. He did then. And I just wrote him a note back with the book. I sent him the book and I said, thank you for believing in John Barry and I back in 1975 because his instinct trusted us to do it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like from your stories, you guys hit it off pretty much immediately, right? I mean, from your very first conversation and meeting on the set of Lady Luck, you were talking about your literal aesthetic visions of what a sci-fi universe could be, other than what was the typical representation of such.
Yes, I mean that was my opinion. I wanted to use kind of universe that I personally would like to see because I never ever kind of let's say, connected to any movie. There's Flash Gordon, and I know George liked Flash Gordon. I mean, he tried to get the rights. That was his first idea, but I think destiny smiled upon me that he didn't get the rights and came up with his own spaghetti western. And I think he's very smart to realize he had to be Sergio Leone, he had to be Kurosawa, he had to go about this in a very low budget way to get this made. And so, yeah, we hit it off right from that moment in Mexico. And I liked him. He was as young as I was. We're like students. And he picked up a shovel and helped me shoveling salt because I was doing it. And that's George. I remember doing the same on Phantom Menace. I picked up a shovel even when I was directing because we were trying to get something done in the heat, and we had to shovel over some all the sand prints in the sun.
Okay.
The actors
Yeah.
were waiting, and George was at it, and I was at it. We were doing it the same thing.
That's
I
awesome.
I think we have a common kind of attitude, let's
Hands-on
say,
approach, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
a common attitude to doing things in
Right.
movies. It's not
Right.
like we're the big shouting directors who give commands and everybody obeys. We're all in this together.
It's a team effort. That's what's awesome. And like you say, he trusted you from the beginning as well as others. And just to touch back on what you were saying earlier about how you're pretty much the only one left, you just sent me a message earlier today, letting me know that Robert Watts, producer of Star Wars and Indiana Jones, has passed away, unfortunately, at 86 years old. Did you have many or any interactions with Mr. Watts, or
Oh, many.
do you have any thoughts or words you'd like to say on his passing, or none at all?
No, we became very close on Star Wars. He was one of the five people who stood by George and to get this film made, apart from
Right.
our art department. And he was one of the five, Robert. He stood by George all the way through. And that's why George, he went from line producer up to producer and Raiders and all of these movies.
Hmm.
And Robert was he was a kindred soul. He was deeply spiritual. And after the movies, he had a kind of day of reckoning. He was on a live that Frank Marshall was directing. He was producing that, and something happened, and he had to withdraw. And he and I spent many, many, many hours talking deep stuff because he went through a lot. Um, and he wanted to make spiritual films. That's all he wanted to do towards the end of his life. He was always trying. So yeah, I was more than just, oh yeah, I knew Robert. Oh, what a great guy. He was a very deep, dear friend. And I feel lucky because the documentaries, I've just finished making. I couldn't get to England, but David Whiteley interviewed him for me, and I gave a list of questions. So I've got Robert when he was still really lucid, and I've got him in the documentary,
That's great.
which I'm very pleased about. And also I just got John Rinsler, who edited my book and who was really hugely influential on creating Cinema Alchemist into a decent book for me, editing it. Every word I wrote for Galaxy Built on Hope, I sent to John Rinsler, and he edited for me and gave me advice, and I restructured it because of some of his advice. And he was dying of cancer, and I was helping him a great deal with Chinese medicine advice. And I got him just before he passed into the documentary. So, these legends are all around me. So I told my Chinese doctor, see, you can't retire. You're gonna keep
You gotta keep
treating
you
me. He said,
going,
Roger,
right?
you live to 120,
Yeah.
no problem. So I
Yeah.
said, good, you keep me going.
Right. Well, condolences on the passing of your friend. And it's been sad. It's been recently. Of course, we lost James Earl Jones,
Yeah.
the voice of Vader himself. And, a lot actually, unfortunately, it's been a strange week where there
Yes.
has been a handful of actors of older generations who have passed on, like four or five in the past week.
Yep.
And yeah, I guess the generations are just starting to get to that age, unfortunately.
Yeah, I
And
know. A
but you're
reminder.
still here and you're trudging
I'm,
along and you're telling these
I'm
stories
keeping
and
healthy and going.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and
I
you have
have to.
things you have planned ahead as well, which are
Yes. Oh,
amazing,
yeah.
you know, and hopefully we get widespread distribution of the documentary one day, and as many people can see this story as possible, right? Like,
Yes,
yeah,
indeed. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'm working on stuff now. So, yeah, I keep going.
Yeah, it's great. I was looking over your IMDb because I'm familiar with a lot of the things you have done, but it's insane to all the different aspects of filmmaking that you've been able to dip your toe into. You've been a producer, a writer, a director, a set decorator, just like you've almost filled every role, and it's true cinema alchemy to just be taking lead and turning it into cinema gold. Is there, do you consider yourself just a filmmaker, or is there more specific part of filmmaking you consider yourself to be best at? Like, how do you view yourself in this industry?
I think filmmaker, yeah, that's why I kind of that title is better because it does encompass everything, and even now, if I'm making a movie, I'm deeply entrenched in the art direction and all of that of it. It just comes naturally in the acting. I'm in all sides of it. So I like that aspect of the composite elements that have to go together to make a movie. In the end, it's the story that matters, and how the actors portray your story, but the atmosphere, and this is where my mentor was Kurosawa, as was George's mentor. And Kurosawa's really stands out alone in the way that he made movies with the drama of Mount Fuji that invaded the atmosphere and everything. And then, his paintings I've seen, like amazingly rough, but paintings of scenes that he would come up with to try to get the funding and everything. Amazing. So, and I think that kind of filmmaking, when I look at the history of what I loved, it's that, and I love Tarkovsky. Again, filmmaking that relates to the subconscious, not the conscious. And certainly I did that with Black Angel, and that's what Star Wars did. So all of these elements, I think, yeah, they I do encompass a lot of different things. I know that, when I made The Sender, which is my first feature film, and I had hell at the hands of the studio, I went through what George went through, and it killed my career for years. But, I get Quentin Tarantino telling me personally and publicly telling it's the best film he ever saw of 1982.
It's crazy.
And
It's
I
got
and I met Guillermo del Toro, who said I just a huge fan of this film. And I met Jim Henson. I met
You met
um,
Jim Henson. Oh, goodness.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
of
He came
course,
and hugged
of
me.
course, actually, there would be a lot of connection and chance for that to happen, wouldn't there?
Well, I was at the Avoriaz Festival. My film that Paramount had dumped opened that huge science fiction festival, and Jim
Mm.
Henson came down and gave me a hug and said, "I
Oh,
love your film." I met James John. I met uh, well, Gary Kurtz was there. I met then the Mad Max director who was showing um, his first screening, like a director's cut of Mad Max at the same
George Miller.
festival.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
George
Yeah.
Miller. He came down and gave me a hug and invited me to be on the radio with him, and we became deep friends. I mean, in Sydney, he
Oh,
gave me a copy of Hero with a Thousand Faces
oh.
because he loved Black Angel so much and said, I want you to read this because you'll understand what you did, because I didn't know Joseph Campbell at that stage. So all of these people I admired were obviously, so the only thing I probably have a regret of, I didn't go back into that kind of psychological horror because I think I pretty much scared an audience and I obviously was quite good at it. So, but I couldn't get anything funded, the studios dumped it.
Always the hard part, right?
Yep.
So that original vision, having the idea and the discussions with George about wanting to see a more used look in a universe, a more believable, type of mechanics and such. Uh, where did that like come from? Were there things in your childhood and teenage years that influenced you to just prefer that kind of junky used aesthetic, or was there specific films, or did like how did that idea even come into your head? Because nothing had really ever been done in that type of aesthetic as far as sci-fi before at all. So I'm just wondering, like, was that just literally a spark that came into your brains one day, or were there influences there?
It was, I've analyzed this in the documentary deeply. I had to go back and think, where does this all come from? And
Okay.
I personally really liked Alphaville, which is a film that Jean-Luc Godard made and turned Paris into a science fiction city with an 8mm little camera with no budget. And in fact, I later learned that that's one of the posters George has in Skywalker. So he'd also seen that. And
That's
I
awesome.
went back. I do remember I got all my shiny dinky toys when I was young, and I would paint them. I would age them down a bit. And I had a little cheap camera I bought. And I, in the garden, I remember making tracks and putting them in and tried to make it look like they were real inside. So I was inherently doing this naturally. In, I think I went back. So I was born in Croydon in 1944,
Okay.
2 years before the end of the war. So my mother, my father would never talk about the war. None of the aunts, nobody. One
The
aunt told me,
unspoken thing, right?
unspoken,
Yeah.
one aunt told me a story of when I was 6 months old. I was at a table with my sister, and the front of the house was blown in by a flying bomb.
Oh man.
And I was covered in red. They thought I was dead. Um, and it turned out my mother had a sacred bottle of ketchup, and it had exploded in the explosion. So I tracked this back doing the documentary and found out that the British Secret Service at the time fooled the Nazis into thinking they were bombing the center of London, and they'd only got enough gas in the tanks that all the bombs fell on Croydon. So I found the school that was right next to our house that got bombed and flattened. And I got a picture of it. I found it in the museum and they allowed me to have a picture, and I've got that in the documentary. So I grew up with bombed London. So I wouldn't remember this if I was hypnotized and went back and regression, I'm sure it would all come out. So my kind of childhood would have been fueled by that kind of atmosphere around me. So maybe that influenced it. But I just always, I loved King Arthur. I loved Excalibur. I liked the Impressionists, that the paintings I always went to were always very real. So I think it was somehow that's the way I looked at the world. That I don't I we all liked James Bond in the old days, and the sets were part of the experience. But I personally prefer the newer ones because now, and I think I was very lucky. The first job that I ever got by sheer destiny was with John Box, who designed the picture that when I saw at the Odeon Leicester Square made me want to go into movies, which was Dr. Zhivago. John Box was doing Oliver, and he took me on as T-boy. He saw something in me and took me in. The sets on that film of the old canals and all of this were just stunning. If you watch it, it's the original musical of Oliver that Sir Carol Reed did. And, John Box finally took me off tea making and everything, and I got to draw up one of the sets, and I was really involved in making the set look real, the old canals and broken bicycles. This was my world. And the first prop I ever made in my history of cinema was Fagan's box.
Really?
And they gave me this brand new pine wood box. I didn't know what a set decorator was. They just said, why don't you make this? And I took it home. I spent hours and hours with polishes, getting blow torches. I wanted to make this look so real, no one would know it wasn't an old box, and that's what I did. So there's obviously a natural affinity for this going back over time.
Right. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, that totally suits it to it, right?
Yeah.
One of the first musicals I ever did was Oliver,
Oh,
a big community production, and it was like the first big show I had ever done outside of like a school play, where it
yeah.
was like a bigger. It was in the Meadowvale Theater here, or out near Mississauga, or in Mississauga, I should say. And yeah, that's a fantastic play. And I remember we used to get creative. We actually I was just one of the boys in Fagin's gang, and they gave us pipes to kind of just pretend we were
Right.
smoking. But I always was like, this doesn't feel right to just be miming something in this really nice production where these sets of are just incredible, and the costuming, it was like high quality stuff. So I remember I thought I'm gonna get some baby powder, and I put baby powder inside the pipes.
Really?
And I was like, guys, like, and a few of us did that. And then during dress rehearsal, we just give a little puff, like here and there, and a little
Really?
cloud. And the director freaked out, and he thought we were smoking for a minute because it just, with the
Oh,
lights, it looked so effective. And I just felt so cool to come up with
yeah.
such a simple little solution that translates through the film into such realism, even though it was
Right.
on stage. It's um the Star Wars coming into your lap must have just been so exciting.
It was. It was my holy grail, that I'd hit that moment of destiny that came in a moment of time that I was really ready for it. I had designed a film called Aikenfield, which was a cooperative, very low budget, but it was Sir Peter Hall and Ronald Blythe, who's one of the great British writers from Suffolk and the composer. That it was the trilogy of Suffolk, and it was about Suffolk in the days of the terrible recession, the First World War looming through, and it was a story of a young boy who was leaving for good and leaving behind such a legacy. And I had to get all of that done on my own. I stayed at the writer's house with no money, and I got all the old Shire horses and plows and everything, and I got it looking like you wouldn't know that they weren't in the First World War. These things appealed to me, and I'd already done this, and then I'd been on Oliver, so I just knowing that this was a spaghetti western, and they were my favorite westerns. I loved Sergio Leone. They were better than the big John Ford Hollywood ones.
Oh
They were
yeah,
much more real to me.
so much better. Yeah.
So here was a director saying, "I want, I want a Kurosawa like spaghetti western."
Yeah.
And so
So
it was a dream.
when everything's, you've gone through all the hassles, all the red tape, and you're finally ready to go, what do you do? Do you like follow the script in order? Is there a shooting schedule that you need to have certain sets decorated in time for? Like, how does the organization of throwing all this junk into a movie to make it look good even begin?
Yeah, there's Robert Watts did a got a schedule done. The problem for us was there was no money, and Fox didn't commit to that movie. So George, out of his own money, rented a tiny studio in London that John Barry and myself and Les Dilly and Robert Watts were based on for 4 months. And then we knew once the film had triggered, they gave the money in January. We started at the studio. We were shooting in March. Now, any science fiction film has a year prep. So I was faced with how to do this. What I do is I take the script, takes quite a few days, and I break it down. Every prop, every set, everything I need, everything I think I need, every single thing that's written in the script is like ironclad. You have to provide it. And I looked at that and thought, well, I can't afford this. And I can't afford all these weapons, or I can't afford to do this. How are we going to do that? And um, we established very early on that we had to make R2D2 because There was no movie if we couldn't, and it was impossible to do. There was no CGI at that time, and there was no primitive radio control. That special effects was always very pompous about saying it's going to be wonderful and all of this, and we knew it didn't work very well. Um, so while we set about making that round Kenny Baker at 4 foot high, and also our vision was guidance was Ralph McQuarrie's paintings, and George had an unknown talent at the time, but he had Ralph, he found, paint up scenes and characters for him while he wrote the script. So we had 6 paintings, which really were, there was Tatooine, there was everything in them. They were just he's the unsung hero of Star Wars. Everything that we see was in there, bar the lightsaber.
He's our point of view, pretty much.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so I thought, you know what? I can't afford these weapons. I can't afford to make them. I know there's no time to make them. So on my own, I went to my friend who owned the only weapons facility in London. Anything you wanted was there. They were huge. They could arm a World War II or a World War One. They armed Gandhi. I mean, anything. So I went to my friend who owned it and said, listen, this is what I got to do. So I got the Sterling submachine gun, which to me is a science fiction weapon on its own. It's beautiful.
Right.
And my buyer, who hadn't started then, but I asked him, he got me some T-Strick. I stuck it around the barrel. I scavenged around in Baptist and found these boxes of a lot of night sights that rangefinders that were used in Ireland. They were unused. So I took those, stuck them on the top with super glue at that point, took away the big long clip and put a little one on so that, and this thing could fire. And I thought, well, this is great. And then I thought, well, George keeps telling me that Han Solo's a Western hero. And I found the Mauser, which to me, again, I could have just used it. It would have fitted perfectly in the Star Wars world, but I thought I'd better change it a bit. So I stuck some more of these sights on it, and I found a box, and there were some flash excluders. They hid the flash on the front, stuck it on the back, and thought, well, I don't have to make these weapons. I can rent them, as many as I want, like for the stormtroopers. So we can get them in the studio and send them back at the end. They'll just take them apart. So that's cheap.
Right.
And it can be done quickly. So I called John Barry and said, you better get George and you better come and see what I'm doing. And it was literally okay, I'm going to get fired because this is stupid idea, or that's it, and George came in, smiled, loved them. He saw we could fire them, and he stayed with me, which is the confirmation I was on the track, and we made Princess Leia's gun together, him sticking bits on with me with super glue.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah, so that's
Oh,
where everything started, and it all grew from there. Um, and I scrounged around. Ralph McQuarrie had given Chewbacca a blaster, and scrounging around, I found that bowcaster with the balls on the end. I just loved it, and said,
yeah. What was that? Like, what's the story behind the bowcaster? Yet another
it,
iconic thing you just thought
it's
up.
a crossbow, but this one they'd got in there for some reason had 2 balls on the end. It made it
So it
different.
came like that.
It came like that, and
Oh,
then I got some more of those night sight viewfinders, stuck those on the top, showed George, and he changed the script and said, no, suits him perfectly. And then I thought, well, we've got these Tusken Raiders. They're desert people. They don't have money. They're not like the Death Stars. So again, I was looking around, I saw on a shelf the gaffy stick, and I looked at it and went, wow, this would be amazing. I've got to change it. So I found an old mace they had for medieval weapons, drilled out the end, stuck that in the end, and showed George it is Tusken Raiders. Um, and so
you know what I
it
love?
all
I not to draw up a plot hole or anything, but I love how you didn't even consider the fact that we've never seen a single tree on Tatooine.
no,
Where'd these
no.
sticks come from? Who cares? They got gaffy sticks.
Uh,
Awesome. That's what I loved about this, right? Who cared? Like it didn't matter.
it doesn't matter. It
Yeah.
was right for the characters. It made that it made
Hmm.
the distinction between desert people. I followed the same with the lightsabers. I
Primitive,
managed to,
tribal, right? Yeah.
yeah, and I
Hmm.
wanted to. I took a lot of care. It wasn't just like getting weapons and sticking them in people's hands. I took a lot of care to match them to the characters.
Right.
So that, building this R2-D2 out of wood from the carpenter's house with no money, and I found the laptop because he couldn't build a dome.
Right.
And so I found a laptop in an abandoned scrap heap full of old light bits, and that fitted. I measured it, and that was perfect size. I'd gone to an old company called Trading Post, and they let me have a handful of bits and pieces, and I found those lights that were from a Dakota, stuck those in to make it look a bit more like Ralph McQuarrie's, and I think this is how it was made. Bill said, I can't make those hands on the front of the arms, Roger. And he sent me home with a penknife, literally,
Right.
and a piece of wood, and I carved it at home at night. So I think by then I thought, okay, and driving around London, because I thought, wow, we got to make all these sets. How am I going to do this? And I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I've been on submarines, I've been in bombers and stuff. So I kind of came up. I used to drive around London. I had a Mustang, a left-hand drive Mustang. So I
Nice.
was already, it was very difficult to drive in London, but I was already kind of not the same as everyone else, I think. And my ban were the doors at that time.
Right.
I would blast the doors driving around.
Crazy
And
hippie. Yeah.
I was driving thinking, you know what, if I got airplane scrap, I could make the sets. And I went straight into John Barry and George, and I said, I need to ask you a question. If I get airplane scrap, I could probably buy a lot and make the sets, dress them out of it, and make it look like what you're wanting, the piece of junk, as Luke says, the
Yeah.
Millennium Falcon. And God bless them, they said, let's do it. And
Yeah.
that's what happened. They flew me around. As soon as we got the money, that was the first thing I did in EMI Studios. They flew me in a little plane around London, around England, 4 airfields that had mountains of scrap. You have no idea that all the engines from
Right.
jetliners rotting in the rain.
Wow.
I think £50 is all I spent out of my budget and bought
Were
truckloads.
were you selective about the truckloads? Did you kind of walk
Yep.
around and be like that piece, or were they just like, we'll load up however
No,
match
no,
and you were
no,
able
no.
to
I
be
selected
selective?
everything.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like, there's a picture of me standing by one of the death
Yes.
engines. I sent
Yeah.
you, I think.
Yeah.
No, no, I selected the engines. I selected pieces of the fuselage, pieces of cockpits. I particularly
Brilliant.
liked the warming drawers that were in liners where the food is kept. They're all over Star Wars. If you look at
Okay.
Tatooine,
Yeah.
they're dressed everywhere. Um, and also then after we'd done that, the buyer said, "Come on, one day we're going to Gloucestershire," and he'd found a scrap dealer. He had 7 full-size cargo planes that were brand new, and the RAF had decided they didn't need them, and he was about to cut them up. And he said, "Tell me what you want, and I'll just cut it up." So I said, "Look,
Oh,
I want this
wow.
fuselage. I want these cockpit bits. I want this." I went round and told him, and he cut them all up.
Score.
And yeah, all of that came in. So it was all very much considered. Yes.
That's brilliant. It's amazing how it just comes together like that. Well, I'm glad you're able to be selective about it. And they were just, it would have been a lot harder if they just drove you truckloads into junk and you kind of had to make it fit everywhere, right?
No, no. I mean, and I told this story to you, and
Yeah.
this is what the head prop master, who was a giant in the industry and was one of the few people on our side. He did Stanley Kubrick's movies, he did David Lean's movies. He asked, well, I was boy to him, "What do you want, boy?"
Right.
And I said, "I need you to clean out the prop room. I want no shelves, nothing, just some metal, put in some metal shelves. All this junk is going to come in. We need to break it down and put it into components, because when you look at a flying ship, it would have duplicates, triplicates. It has to be placed like it's engineered." And I was there, then he did that, and then this low loader was backing in one day, and there were about six jet engines all roped on. It was piled high with airplane junk like that. He's standing next to me and he said, "You know, you're mad, boy." And I thought, yes, I probably am. But
Probably.
um,
But we're gonna make this damn movie, damn
yeah,
it.
bless him. Then he said,
Yeah.
"What do you want?" And I said, "I need to get tools. I need to teach these prop boys who've never done this before how to break this down and how to turn it into what we
Well,
want." And that kind of how we made the Millennium Falcon, the cockpit and the main hold area. I didn't know it would work. I mean, I was crossing my fingers, praying that, my I'd made these assumptions and made these
they're
kind of,
bringing in truckloads of airplanes.
yeah,
Yeah, I
and
hope you made the right choice.
yeah, and I think I told you we
Yeah.
were building the Millennium Falcon hold. It looked terrible. It looked like crap, and just piling more and more, more and more. I kept ordering more and more junk until one day it just emerged. Like I saw people come on the set and their eyes like open and they were going, "Wow, this is a ship." So that was the day I knew, okay, I think this is going to revolutionize the whole film industry.
That's awesome. Was I would imagine that there would a lot of been a lot of new skills being learned by people throughout the filming of the movie because as we've talked about in the past, a lot of the lines get blurred as to what your actual role in making the movie is. And I can imagine that, like, set builders to set decorators to set painters to wardrobe, all these lines must be so blurred when you're making a movie in the way that Star Wars was made. So, I, it, were you constantly trying to figure out new ways to do stuff or having to learn like you just said you had to show all these prop kids how to all of a sudden cut and weld metal, right? Like
Yeah, it is in those days too. The set decorator had to do everything. It all fell under me. The vehicles, the robots, I mean, everything.
right.
Nowadays, it's all separated out. They have a different department for, even plain wheels would be some other department. So I had to do it all. I was facing um, formidable denigration. I was being denigrated. The art department, don't forget, I was like long haired, came from art school and independent, making movies,
Right.
into an art department of suits and ties. And it sums it up. When we went into the studio, the first thing they did was put up a big table and put all my props I'd made on it, all the weapons, everything that I'd done up to that point, like our wooden R2-D2 that didn't look
Right.
like anything. And in they come, all of the traditional film industry people. They looked at it, the lead prop on the floor, and the first AD, they picked up my Sterling and threw it at me and said, "This is a pile of crap. We're making a science fiction movie for a big Hollywood director," and they went off to get me fired. That never changed. So I
Wow.
was alone with John Barry. That's why George says, you can see it on his interview with Christopher Nolan on YouTube when he's talking about making films, that he says there were only five people actually stood by my side to make that film. And it's in the forward he just wrote. I didn't care. I had enough belief in myself. I'd never followed the rules. I'd always been outsider growing up. I'd always challenged everything. So, and it took a while for the draftsman because there's a traditional way of making films. They all follow. The designer designs it based on the script, and then it gets
Right.
drawn up, and then it goes to the workshops, and they build in the plaster shop, and it comes out at the other end. We didn't have time to do that. There was no way. So John Barry got it very quickly, and he was teaching them, like the cantina, above the cantina, there's lots of Rolls-Royce engine parts up there.
Right.
He took those, instead of them designing and have to make it, they went down and plundered my huge supply now and they got them anodized in gold, and I bought so many water pipes in all different sizes. They got my water pipes and were putting them up. They actually had to
Just
learn that this,
pilfering everything. Yeah.
yeah, they had to learn that this crazy kid who was doing all this stuff actually was the solution to getting this made and to make this film the way that it should be made and look. So I had to no, I had to rely on my own and John Barry. Even Les Dealey, Les, bless him, my art director partner. Les was a plasterer and grew up from that into the film industry, but Les was there to get things done. He wasn't creative. I was every film we did as art director partners, he got it done. I was the creative. So I
It
was kind of on my own, but I had George's back.
yeah. It blows my mind still to this day that like this tension exists and creatives aren't allowed to be. I mean, movie making has been done this way since the days of Charlie Chaplin. Like you rolled up your sleeves and you figured it out.
Yes.
From silent movies up until these kids in the 80s, like the kids, like even like J.J. Abrams and like guys like this who were, influenced by George Lucas and those movies of the 80s and the Steven Spielbergs. And, same way, just like Jaws, like
Yeah.
the story of how Jaws was made is
Yeah.
is is classic as far as, trying to make things happen with nothing. And you were pretty much like the first to do it in the genre in this way. And it just still blows my mind that they weren't like, yeah, this is just cool. Let them go. Like they always think they know better, eh?
Well, it was tradition. I remember I went to meet um, the art director on one of the earlier Monty Python films, and he turned me down. He didn't understand that I could do this job and turned me down and hired some traditional set decorator, and it never was as good. And then I end up, because I got to know the Pythons and having seen what I'd done and everything, I end up designing Life of Brian
Awesome.
with Terry Gilliam together. We did it together. So I think that Star Wars enabled me to without being questioned. It's like George, without being questioned after that first film hit. Nobody questioned him anymore about he knew what he was doing. Of course, he knew what he was doing, and he
Right.
made and financed the other films himself.
But they still did silly things like, hiring people who weren't really suited for their roles on Empire. And,
Yeah,
and as much as it's weird that it's like 90% of adult Star Wars fans' favorite Star Wars movie, it's the least of Star Warsy of the movies because it's not for kids. I mean, all the other Star Wars he pretty much made for kids, and Empire has this real dark vibe about it. So it's interesting that it became almost like the most popular, but it never was
because
for
it's for
me.
adults, because it's
Yeah,
popular
yeah,
for adults, you see. But every
yeah,
other film George made for 9 to 12-year-olds, and he also gave them a comedy aspect. He's a George's talent. He could make it kind of funny and geeky, but only at the limit that worked as a story.
right,
And he had the least to do with Empire. He was figuring out ILM, the ranch, doing everything, and he allowed Gary Kurtz to take the reins with Owen Kirshner, who's a big Hollywood maverick. And of course, he made the film that he wanted. You know, Gary Kurtz split from George after that. George felt really
right.
let down that that
Yeah,
movie had gone a different way. And unfortunately, John Barry had gone off to make Saturn 3 as a director, so he wasn't available to design it. I was off making Black Angel, my
right.
movie, so I wasn't able to go back on it as set decorator. And they appointed Norman Reynolds, who was the art director, who was the anchor for John to get everything done. I think all of that, you know, gave that film something of a different. And the set decorator should never have been set decorating science fiction. I knew
Right,
him.
yeah.
He's fantastic at films like Howard's End and period films and everything.
Oh,
But
okay.
you have to love science fiction. I read it. I
Oh, yeah.
studied it.
Yeah.
I got graphic novels.
You
I was
evolved it. That's
yes.
what the thing is. Like, it's crazy, Roger, because we sit here and I see at the shows and the book, and obviously the big tagline points are the things we hear a lot. You are the creator of the lightsaber. You are the creator of R2D2. But I think what is we're really underwriting here is the fact that you helped create an entire genre of science fiction. To this day, the main aesthetic of a science fiction movie is a junky used, hardcore universe. To this day, for the last
Yes.
40 or 50 years, to from Edge of Tomorrow to the Matrix, like all of it comes from what you guys did. And I think that, to me, is I think that's what blows my mind the most, is that you guys literally took science fiction and furthered it. You guys furthered an entire genre, and that's amazing to me. It's
Well,
got to feel cool.
yeah, it's cool. And it did get cemented because Alien followed. And,
Which you
you
had a
know,
hand in as well. So was it straight up? Did Ridley Scott straight up come to you and be like, "Yo, I need some of that magic on Alien"? Like,
no, Ridley got the film. I was off on Life of Brian and wasn't available. So Michael Seymour, his designer who did all his commercials for him, they worked out how to build it over two stages. They built a Nostromo, and Ridley wanted it all in one. He didn't want it like sets open. It was to be you went in one little corner and you
right.
walked through that ship.
That's cool.
Um, Michael Seymour, again, should never have been doing science fiction. It wasn't his world. He didn't understand it at all. And he hired some kid who'd never worked on a film before. He said, "Oh, I could do that junk that Roger Christian does. That's easy." And Life of Brian got cancelled. The Lord Delfont financing it read the script one day, and we were only 4 or 5 weeks away from leaving for Tunisia to start shooting. The film
Wow.
got cancelled on the spot. He said, "This is blasphemous. I can't do this."
Oh no.
And I drove up to London to meet with the producers and Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones, and they were saying, "We're going to make this film. We need you. We need you to carry on." And the phone literally in there, they said, "Oh, there's a call for you from Ridley." And Ridley said, "Is it true? This film's gone down?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Get your backside down to Shepperton now. I need you."
Awesome.
I'd done commercials for Ridley. I art directed them, and I knew
Okay.
his brother Tony as well. I'd done it for him. I knew him, and we had a very similar kind of, again, I was trying to do I knew he was involved with Tristram and Isolde and films like that. So we'd had conversations about it. And I drove down to Shepperton, read this script, and like in 90 minutes, it was like a train ride. And I thought, oh my God. And then seeing these Giga originals around the office walls, there were 6 original paintings, and I knew what Ridley was going to do with it. So I just signed on immediately. And and again, within the first days there, the set decorator who did actually do Howard's End and got Oscars for those ran up to me as I walked across the stage and said, "Thank God you're here. What do I do with all this scrap? I don't know." And so, these are stories that show that, yes, there was a kind of singular change in the entire kind of way of making films. And I had to Well, Ridley then wanted to do a screen test of Sigourney Weaver. He wanted Sigourney, and the studio wanted a star, and they allowed him to do a proper screen test. So he said, "I want to put her in action. Can you build me a piece of corridor like you know what I want?" And he showed the main crew and the art directors Dr. Strangelove. And when the bomber, the B-52, was there, he was turned around. He said, "That's what I want. I want it like hair, the cockpits." See, Michael Seymour came out afterwards and said, "What does he mean, hair? I don't understand. We're not building hair on the sets." And I said, "Michael, it means he wants it covered in switches and panels and age kind of pipes and things like that." So he said, "Oh, well, you know what to do. Go and do it." And so that's what I did. I created a set for Ridley for the screen test. It's on YouTube. You can see it. And that was it. That was there with the corridors. I got it all army green and made it. And went into a kind of nightmare again because there wasn't enough money. It was very low budget, and I had to make that bridge set. I was talking on a podcast 2 days ago, and they said, "Is there anything stand out?" And I said, "The bridge on Alien, to me, is of equal importance to the lightsaber in kind of what my
Oh,
career and what I've done, because that bridge set was just stunning, and it was
huh,
a monster to make. I mean, it drove me nuts. We were doing 7 days a week, no hours. My girlfriend at the time could only come and see me on Sunday lunchtimes. We sat
right,
outside the set. I drove home every night, and I don't think I ever finished a meal. I fell asleep.
right.
And we also had jet lag because we'd had to go to the Academy Awards while we were doing all of that.
Oh.
So we were jet lagged to everything.
I was
But
tired from having to drop in from the Oscars
but
last
yeah,
night,
we
but
had
yeah.
like 4 days fly there and fly back because Alien, the pressure of doing it. But I
Yeah,
think those two movies really cemented it. They locked it
yeah.
in that this was the way to do it.
It sounds like you may be proudest. That may be one of your most proudest creations is the bridge then, yeah?
Yeah, the bridge set and the
Yeah.
Millennium Falcon hold, which I love. It's my favorite set
Okay.
on Star Wars. I think, that was when I didn't know it was work and I thought it wasn't going to work, and it did finally work, and it looked
Right.
pretty amazing. So that
Well,
one,
yeah.
they stand out certainly as kind of going out on a limb,
Right. Right. Yeah.
saying something will work, and then just keep digging in and digging in and digging in until it does work, because you can't give up. You just got to go. You have an idea
Right.
and you've got to
Needs
make
to
it
be done.
work. And I
Show
knew
must
it
go
would
on. Yeah.
work. I
Yeah.
knew I could make it like a flying submarine.
Right. And that's totally the feel of it. Absolutely.
But
Yeah, yeah,
also, if you
yeah.
look, um, the first kind of space pods that went up, they're not like sitting in armchairs and that. They are crammed in with
Right.
pipes and switches and mechanisms. There isn't any room because there can't be when you're
Right.
trying to move something. So I knew that everything had to be condensed like that and made, again,
Yeah.
it's this whole thing. I wanted it real. I wanted this to be a real
Right.
working, both of them working ships.
Yeah. Well, think of the nerves that you brought out in people and that claustrophobic hot
Yeah.
feeling. Yeah, I'm thinking about it now, like thinking of scenes from the movie, and
Yeah.
it's amazing. It really is. It's not like they do nowadays. As much as they've got cool stuff, I mean, the practicality of it, well, it's evident. I mean, practical filmmaking is making a comeback, right? Like,
Yes.
I think I was personally saying, not saying I was ahead of anything, but for me, it was Hellboy 2.
Right.
When I saw Hellboy 2, I was like, okay, Guillermo's got this mastered. He understands that you need
Yes.
to have a mix of your
Yes.
practical. Like it's so cool. I love the prequels. I'm a prequel apologist till the end. I love
Right.
those movies. But yeah, episode 2 is a bit of a cartoon, and we're talking about 25, 30-year-old, CGI. Things have come a long way since. But I think the trick always was the mix of practical and CGI to kind of just, give it that layering. I feel like Guillermo figured that out back then.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
keep telling him he's the one true film artist working, and I said, "You can't give
right.
up. You have got to get going. You're the only singular artist working today."
Hmm.
And he is. I mean, whatever he does, it's just, you know, when you look at The Shape of Water, it's mostly live action effects. Most of
Right.
it he did for real, and it's beautiful. The emotions, the reality of that film, just beautiful.
Do you think he'll ever get his hands on some Star Wars?
I don't know. I don't know whether he'd even want to.
Oh, come
I
on. He
mean,
must want to.
well,
Like, what he's not insane, is he?
you've seen in my Galaxy, I interviewed him, and he said he was a wee lad and he went to the cinema. I didn't know what it was, and saw Star Wars and went around 4 times and kept looking. What is this? And that made him become a director. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, he would be masterful at it.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
question. He'd do an amazing, probably the best of
I
anyone.
See, I don't think I'm one of those positive glass half full kind of guys who thinks that everybody can get a crack, you know? I mean, a lot of the tension that seems to come in the Star Wars universe fandom these days is from, I think, certain people just taking certain things way too seriously. And yeah, there have been a lot of screw ups. I think there's been a lot of mishandling. A lot of the stories don't quite fit what I may, consider to be true Star Wars lore or material. But there's going to be more. And I don't
Yes.
have to watch everything. I'm always going to have that original movie that you helped make to go back and watch. And I think we forget about the fact, a lot of people talk about George or pre Disney and Lucasfilm Star Wars, but George Lucas isn't going to be around forever. And, God forbid the day comes that George is no longer with us. It's not like they were going to stop making Star Wars. Somebody was always going to have to tread these waters that we're going through now, where they're figuring out kind of how to do things without George. And there's a lot of mistakes and there's some very cool stuff. And I think you kind of just take it as it comes. But, we always have Filoni. Filoni's kind of correcting a lot of the big ship's directions in a certain way. And as much as, I agree with a lot of the assessments of certain Star Wars products, I don't feel the need to like lose my mind about it or take it so personally that, I'm insanely offended about it. But I do want to see it, be good. But
Yes.
I like to see people get cracks at things. It's like Batman. I've been reading Batman forever. Batman's been around for 80 years. How many different versions of Batman have there been, right?
It's
It's
true, but then
yeah.
you get the Christopher Nolan versions and you realize here's a master making
Oh,
what
absolutely.
Batman, everybody, every Frank Miller,
Uh,
everything imagined, there it is on the screen. So I think he has that sensibility and guess what? He's a massive Star Wars fan.
oh, that
He's a
would be
collector.
cool. Yeah,
He's
but
a collector.
yeah.
And I asked him, I met him, and I said, do you remember? He said, yes, I remember. I was 11 years old. My father took, it's the cinema, the time, everything. It changed his life. So, those are the masters who should be doing it, I
Oh,
think.
yes.
Then,
Yeah.
like Guillermo, like Christopher Nolan, James Cameron, these people understood and they have the same kind of respect for the world,
Right.
and they will enhance it and bring new visions to it, but it's always within the canon.
Yeah, that's part of what I think maybe is has made me like I already had my heart broken way back when Disney bought Star Wars and they said, "Okay, nothing counts." I had spent 20 years of my life reading comic books and novels and playing games, and there was this entire expanded Star Wars universe that I still think is far superior. I'm sorry to
Yes,
anything that has been done Disney wise. Anything. I would put the entire Jedi Academy series alone up against anything Disney has done with Star Wars. But I had to accept I'm never going to get that. I'm never
right.
going to get George's original ideas for what the sequels should have been. It's just, I can whine about it or I can hope for the best and more will come. And like you're saying, like, could you imagine a Christopher Nolan Star Wars? It would be like
Yes,
a very Andor probably type Star
yes,
Wars, a very cerebral Star Wars. That would be cool.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I think
Mm.
that's the world, but
Yeah.
who knows? We'll
Yeah.
we'll see what's going to come now. I have my own opinions on that, so
Yeah, well, I mean, my biggest thing is my faith in Filoni. I know you're a fan of Dave Filoni,
yeah, I
and
thank him every day myself here. I think I thank him. He's brought everything back, and he's been
yeah,
very reverent to what we did on that first film and brought it back.
yeah. I recently made a video about a new lightsaber that I was sent, and that lightsaber is an Anakin Skywalker Episode 3 lightsaber. It was modeled after Anakin's in Revenge of the Sith. And in the video, I made a point to comment about how it had been correctly originally designed after your lightsaber because of the lack of rivets in the grip strips on
Right.
the hilts.
Right.
And I got a little flack from a few people being like, there's a whole bunch of inaccuracies with that lightsaber. Why are you pointing out this? Why are you pointing out that? And I had to explain. I was like, to be honest, this is a little kind of an inside joke because I know it's a bit of a personal pet peeve of Rogers that they added those damn rivets because
Yes.
it took away from the mythicness of the weapon, right?
Yeah, it added a human touch to it. See, that was the set decorator who I said who was brilliant at what he did, but
Right.
he added those in and without thinking, and he wouldn't understand a Jedi and the mystic and all of this. This is a mystical weapon of the Jedi's. And if you add rivets, it suddenly humanizes it to me.
Mhm.
I yeah, it's been my pet peeve, and of course that's the one that carried through. But you mentioned Dave Filoni, and I was watching Obi-Wan Kenobi, and we're getting to the end, and Obi-Wan Kenobi has to get the lightsaber, and I thought, what is he going to dig up? Oh no! And I was sitting there like biting my nails. God bless Dave Filoni, he dug up my original, which is the one that Obi-Wan Kenobi gave to Luke
Yeah.
without rivets. So I'll give him a big hug when I meet him.
Okay, I've had the pleasure of hearing this story a million times. I know you've had to tell it a million times, but I can't let you not be on the show without telling us about the origin of an elegant weapon. So I
Yes.
know that you had to make this prop, and please, can you tell us the origin story of the lightsaber?
Yeah, well, it had eluded me, and as I told you, I got junk. I got an office full of junk. I would get broken calculators, cameras, anything we could find. I would take pieces. I filled my office with it. Nothing specific. It was just I knew I could use it for something
Right.
one day. And I hadn't done the lightsaber because I hadn't found anything that justified a weapon of the Jedi's. And I was getting everything ready for Tunisia, and then of course the biner bins, Luke's binoculars were paramount in that because the lightsaber wasn't used there
Right.
ever. So I got all these three camera parts and I stuck them together with super glue. I found this UMIG and I found a camera that had a flip up lens view screen part, and I stuck it all together with super glue. And I thought, oh, here it is. Yeah, this is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I thought, to let the audience know what I'm doing and to see that it's a binoculars, I'll go and buy two lenses to stick on the front. So there was a shop in London who only did cameras. They were a huge store and they rented out equipment. Brunnings, they were called. So I went to Brunnings, having rented stuff so long for them. I knew the manager. I bought the two lenses and I said, David, do you have anything? I got to make this weapon. I'm trying to find something. And the arrow of destiny came down again because he said, well, go and have a look. There's some boxes under the shelf over there. I haven't looked at them for ages. I pulled out the first box and there was tissue paper, opened it up, and there were these three cell battery handles that went for the Graflex cameras, which he had a lot of because he rented the Graflex out. It was the press camera of the 40s and 50s. I looked at them, I held it and thought, oh, goodness me, here is a lightsaber. And there's something about an object that's designed for something else. And you don't really know what it is, but it has its own kind of invisible kind of gravity. So I raced to the studios. I had some T-strip left over from my Sterlings. I had a few bits left over. So I thought, well, if I make a handle, that looked like a handle. So I stuck seven round. It just fitted perfectly. I did it all by hand. Nothing was
Right.
measured. I didn't like the clip where it clipped to the camera. I didn't want to take it off, but I'd just been I had a screwdriver and some pliers. That's all I had, and I would take things apart. and I took apart a Texas Instrument calculator, and in there was a bubble strip that illuminated the numbers and magnified them, and it fitted beautifully into the clip. And I looked at it and thought, wow. So I called over to George and said, you better come across. I think I found the lightsaber, which was then called laser sword, by the
Laser
way,
sword,
still.
of course, yeah.
So George came across and just held it and smiled profusely. And kind of that was it. Afterwards, he wanted to use it in Tunisia in the desert. He wanted to hang it on Luke's belt, even though it wasn't seen. So I had to get my assistant I'd employed. It was a brand new position as assistant special props kind of
Right,
maker.
right,
And because we didn't have much money, he had a toolbox because he used to be a sculptor using found metal objects, and he had a toolbox full of stuff. So he had some of the D rings in the toolbox and
yeah,
screwed them in the back end for me. And that was it, really. We didn't know how to make the blade, of course, and
right.
we had tea at 7 o'clock every morning in my office because I had a little you put this on charge. I had a little tiny fridge where I had some milk. Um, and sorry, I've got to charge my
That's
computer.
okay. Yeah.
It's telling me that it's going to be dying. Technology. And I had some milk, I had some tea bags, and I had some McVitie chocolate biscuits, which are half chocolate.
Oh.
The British film industry runs on those. I
Oh
had
yeah.
packets. Yeah, oh yeah, I had packets of them, and they'd all munch their biscuits. It's very funny, because uh, Frank Bruton, the big prop master who called me
Mhm.
boy, so he would have about six tea bags and dunk them they all smoke profusely. I
Right.
would take a tea bag, dip it in my tea, and take it out. And he one day looked at me in such disgust. He said, boy, you just frighten the water. So funny. Anyway, at this meeting, I said, listen, I used to do some art art projects, and we used to paint front projection paint, and we get a glow. And they said, "Oh, that's a good idea." So I said, "If we get a stick," George then said, "Well, let's try it." And I went to the special effects. There was a meeting. It's actually written. Somebody's got this paper. There was a meeting about that, and then the
Oh, that's
DP was
cool.
there, Gil Taylor, who was awful throughout it. He just said, "That'll never work, and I don't want that. You'll spoil my set lighting." And George overruled and said, "Roger, do it." And so I did. And John Steers actually put the motor tiny bit off center so it didn't just turn, it wobbled very faintly, and it worked. We got this kind of glow on set, and you
Yeah.
can see it in the rehearsals. We'd made a decision that the light blades should never go through each other. They should be like samurais, they should hit each other.
Right.
And that gave Alec Guinness and Dave Prowse something to hit against while they were doing the only battle really in
Yeah, the only
Star
time they
Wars.
connect, right?
And it worked, and then George afterwards could rotoscope onto it. There was something to key into. That's how we did that. And I made another one. And then it's interesting, you talk about all these anal fans because I'm often accused saying, I don't know what you're talking about. There was only one lightsaber ever, and this is the one. And it was a special effects one someone found later lying on the ground. Nothing like the real one that I made, but that's supposedly the real one because there aren't any pictures in the film. There's none at the end. The D-rings are never shown.
Right, yeah.
George never pointed it out. It's just a lightsaber. It's handed over. It's not ever focused on, ever.
Yeah.
Um, so we interviewed David French for Galaxy Built on Hope, and he tells the story, his side of it, how I came in and asked about this, and he pointed us to these boxes and how it all happened. And then they asked him, "So what happened then?" And he said, "Well, they called me and said, 'Do you have any more?' And he said, 'Well, how many do you want?' And they said, 'Well, how many can we have?' So he said, 'Well, I could let you have 30." So with my 33 original Graflex handles went to us in our
Right. Right.
in the studios. And then they said, "How much did you get paid for that?" He said, £850.
Oh my Lord.
So
Wow.
afterwards, he told me, "You completely wrecked my industry. I can't get any more. They've like every fan wants to buy them."
How many of those got used up, or do you know how many actual like lightsabers they made for the first film? Like,
They made like Mark. It hurt his hand when he was rehearsing for the fighting the training
okay.
ball.
Yeah.
So they made one with foam strips just so he could practice with, and then he used
Oh.
mine for the actual scene. He used mine with Obi-Wan Kenobi, gives it to him first off, and then you can see in some of the set photographs he's got one with a stick on it,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
we switched it out.
Okay.
Um, there was quite a few. There's a couple that I've got, um, and the rest of them they went to special effects to make up different lightweight versions, all sorts of things.
But they did all get used up as far as you know.
Well, that's what Frank Bruton, who told David French and said, "Well, we're going to buy them all because they're
Yeah.
not coming back to you." So they bought them all. Yeah. So who
Right.
knows? They probably got junked. No one believed that film.
Yeah.
Everything got junked, even to the extent of where we'd actually filmed in Tunisia when Rick McCullum had to go back on Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
He was pulling his hair out. No one had any record of where we shot. He didn't know where to go. And it was just by chance David West Reynolds was so upset that these weren't part of archaeology. And he was an archaeologist. He went on his own money as a fan with clips of the film and used his skills and found every single location and every camera angle. And
Crazy,
then
right?
Rick
Yeah.
McCullum took him out and he showed the designers and the photographers, DP, everybody where we shot.
Wow.
Luckily, that happened. So I think everything got junked, you
Yeah.
know.
It's incredible, Roger. You created the single most iconic weapon in cinema history.
For what,
I
$15 probably?
Yeah, right? For how
Yeah.
many pounds? I'm sure it was. Like but it's just such a simple and amazing concept. Like I've been in love with them, obviously, but since I
Yeah.
was a child, like I was never a kid for guns. I was a kid who was
Yeah.
into Robin Hood and
Me too.
Excalibur, King Arthur. I same thing for me. And in fact, my step great grandfather literally grew up playing in Sherwood Forest. Like he
Really.
was from that area, and he used to tell me of him and his friends running through Sherwood playing Robin Hood. And I spent a lot of time growing up at the cottage in Muskoka. So it was always, with my grandpa making bows and arrows or wooden swords. And, we were all about that stuff. So when I saw Return of the Jedi when I was 6 years old, and I saw this thing light up green and it was a literal laser sword, that was it for me. I was like,
Yeah.
this is the coolest thing that's ever been. Like, come on now.
I
Yeah.
think that's part of it, that it isn't a gun and it is, every child wants one. I mean, look at it now. I made something that didn't work. Now we've got such beautiful weapons
Oh,
that you can
right.
fight with. They have
Yeah.
sounds, they have lighting, they
Yeah.
work, they have blades you can hit against each
Yeah.
other,
Yeah.
and it's something that everybody wants. And I loved King Arthur. When I read the script, I knew when you think of King Arthur, you think of Excalibur. That's the mystical
Mhm.
power of that whole adventure. And I
Yeah.
knew if this film could work, that the lightsaber would be the mystical power of this universe. And it's proven to be true.
Yeah. You don't know where he came up with the eventual lightsaber term. Did George ever explain that to you, or did you
It
just see it in the script when it was done?
No, it was laser sword.
Right.
And that based on Kurosawa was sword fighting, and this was a sword, but it was a laser.
Right.
It
But
just evolved into lightsaber
Just one
somewhere
day.
along the way. Yeah, it
Okay.
just
Yeah.
evolved and became a lightsaber.
I
So,
think that's the one question I would ask George. If I ever got to ask him a question, I would be
right,
like, I get the kind of light part, but where did the saber part? Because even if you're talking Kurosawa or whatever, you're more in a katana kind of samurai sword state of mind.
right.
But he called it a saber, which is much more of like a war or like a civil war type weapon in my
Yes,
mind. I'm just that I think that's my one question. I'd be like, George,
right.
where did the term like pop up? Did you see something and go saber? That's it? Or I'm really curious about that.
It may have just accidentally got called that because it was a laser sword. So it
Yeah,
was always a sword. That's
yeah.
what we started out making, and that's how it was called. Somewhere within that pre-production period in EMI, it got changed. So somehow somebody must have maybe mentioned it or accidentally said it,
I
and it
would
just
love to
stuck. I
know.
think it comes from there, honestly. I don't think it
Yeah.
was a
Hey,
conscious
if you're ever
decision.
chatting with him and you
Yeah.
remember, ask him. Say,
We rarely
where did
talk about
saber
Star
come
Wars.
from? I'm just saying,
we,
you know?
we rarely talk about
You know,
Star
it's hard.
Wars when I meet him.
I'm trying to keep it Star Wars because this is an elegant weapon podcast and I have the
Right,
creator of the lightsaber, but it's hard for me because I'm also a cinephile.
right.
And, I hope this isn't blasphemy for you Star Wars folks out there. I love it as much as any of y'all do, but my favorite film of all time is True Romance. And it's hard because I know you were friends with Tony.
Yes,
You have directed Christian Slater, did you not?
yes, I did.
Yes.
Yes.
I just like it's hard. You've met Quentin Tarantino. Like it's so hard for me not to just do an entire podcast with you asking about what's Christian Slater like, or
Yeah.
what did you ever learn anything from Tony Scott? Like you've had such a crazy career, Roger. I hope you get enough credit for the whole thing too. Because yeah, you're the creator of the lightsaber, blah blah blah. But even when people hear at the shows, I hear they realize you worked on Life of Brian, and their eyes light up. They're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
really?" And touch on that. Touch on Life of Brian, because that always makes people really happy that you had any involvement in that movie.
Again, it was very low budget
Right.
in Tunisia, and we had the same. Terry Gilliam makes everything old and used, and
Right.
he and I spent days in Rome just walking about, looking at the scale of whereby you'd have a little street, and then these architecture was so massive. The way they did things, we're drinking from fountains that Romans drank out of. I
Oh,
mean,
it's
nothing had
crazy.
changed. And we went to costume houses and got all of the old stuff from old films and from Jesus of Nazareth. Everything was rented out. We weren't making anything. And then when we were in Tunisia, actually, I took him to Matmata for the end scene of the crosses because I knew the landscape was perfect. So we filmed the crosses right where Luke's homestead is
No,
in the
really?
caves. Yeah, it's right on the edge of the hills there. I've got some photographs of me on the cross,
That's awesome.
and we built that there. And we just lucked out in Sousse. There was an ancient fort, and I showed Terry how we just used parts of it for everything, and then we lucked out because Zeffirelli made the Jesus series there and left a huge Roman Forum set, and we were able to use it. We were able to rent it. So I changed stuff like that. So we were able to do what we did, I guess, on Star Wars and everything is you use what's there and turn it to your advantage. And for a very low budget film, got a huge look. And it was
Yeah.
very determined to make it very kind of dusty and real. We wanted to make a real biblical epic.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was it
I
was
love you just
madness.
went for it.
It was madness, I'm telling you.
I can imagine you and Terry Gilliam cooking up quite a bit of madness. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And there's only me, my buyer from Star Wars, uh, a young art department assistant. That was it. And
yeah,
my wife, who became the translator because she was French, so she was
right.
translating for everybody. That was it. That's all we
Wow.
had.
Yeah.
We did that whole film, the few of us, and we had, prop makers and stuff. But again, we just was found everything we could that existed and adapted it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Even Terry Gilliam would eventually, not eventually, but actually throughout a few of his movies, but especially in films like 12 Monkeys, would adopt that used
yes,
universe look like to a serious extent. Like that's
yeah,
how far that influence went, right?
yeah. He doesn't like new and shiny. He can't relate to it. He has that same mindset that we all do, that we think it should be ultra real, and
Right.
we kind of science fiction is a bit difficult and different because it has working ships and all these things. So it's a blend of mechanical. I mean, Terry goes into the grimy, he loves the mud and the dirt of
Yeah.
medieval and all of this stuff. I mean, we
Yeah.
we we kind of we had to make it work, especially for children. We
Yeah.
weren't dealing with a children's film. George was very adamant about that. And one of the biggest things that George always said to me is, I'm making a documentary. And that was the key for me to know what he was doing. And I remember one day we were talking about it, and he said, in the past, people do a science fiction film. They build these science fiction sets and go, wow, we got to see this. Oh, we'll do a big wide shot of it. And as he said, I treat this the same as a filmmaking way. If you've got an actor going into a building, you don't say, "Look at this great building." You shoot him going in the door, and then maybe you'll get part of the building and the set. He used that absolute technique for Star Wars, that we would never highlight something or make a point of, oh, look at this. As I said with the
Right.
lightsaber, look at the scenes, because even when I was thinking, should I use some clips for the film, for the documentary, I realized they didn't do anything. They weren't explaining anything we did. Obi-Wan gets an old box, takes the thing
Yeah.
out, gives it to Luke. You hardly see it. He fires it up.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not
It
a single close-up shot
No,
of it.
nothing like that. So it was all done very naturally. And
Yeah.
I think that all helped the audience to get into it as a story.
Yeah, it did have a certain like realistic documentary feel that you were witnessing because also to a lot of these actors' credit as well, they made the universe feel lived in. They
Yes,
made it feel they felt familiar with their environment. Like Mark Hamill felt like he grew up on that moisture farm.
yes,
Like that was part of the performance that I think, really helped, of course, the whole thing come together.
yes,
So yeah, yeah. Do you
agreed.
remember his first reaction to the lightsaber? Were you there when he first saw it or was given it?
It was on set,
Yeah,
really. I mean, he
yeah,
saw it in the desert, but there was, he wasn't really involved in that. And just with the binoculars were the first thing he properly used.
right,
And I went
yeah,
to him and said, Mark, I made this with super glue. I've only got one. I'll give you a piece of wood. Don't throw it around. Please be careful of it and use the wood to rehearse.
yeah,
And of course, what happens? There's a scene while I was dressing another set, right on the last day of shooting, Cammy, the part and Biggs that got cut out.
yeah.
What do they start doing? Throwing it to each other on the set and filming.